Welcome to the Joys of Binge Reading, the show for anyone who ever got to the end of a great book and wanted to read the next instalment. We interview successful series authors and recommend the best in mystery, suspense, historical and romance series, so you'll never be without a book you can't put down. You'll find this episode's show notes, a free ebook and lots more information at thejoysofbingereading.com. And now, here's our show.
Catherine Robertson writes funny stories about intelligent, strong women, and it's got her into trouble with people who think humorous women's fiction should never veer from the pink and fluffy. Hi there, I'm your host Jenny Wheeler, and today Catherine talks about escaping labels, why her new book Gabriel's Bay gives men a bigger voice, and bridging the gap between literary and genre fiction. But before we hear from Catherine, just a reminder that the show notes for this binge reading episode are available on the website, thejoysofbingereading.com. That's where you'll find links to Catherine's books and website, as well as information about how to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. But now, here's Catherine. Hello there, Catherine, and welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us.
Oh, thanks, Jenny. Really nice of you to invite me.
It's really fun to have a fellow countryman, country person or country woman, because most of these interviews have been done with people overseas. So we wanted to get a little bit of balance in it. So beginning at the beginning, was there a once upon a time moment when you decided you wanted to write fiction? And if so, was there a catalyst for it?
I think I had always thought about writing fiction much in the same way as I'd thought about winning lotto. And I hadn't actually done anything about it, like buy a ticket or indeed do any kind of creative writing. But I had children quite young and I was self-employed from when I was 26, and there never seemed to be enough time to do anything like writing. But when I moved overseas, the family moved overseas in 2000, and I found myself out of a job because we'd gone to work for a .com, and of course just at the time that the market tanked, and so my husband still had a job, but I didn't. And I had one, and the children were at school, and I suddenly had one of those now or never moments. And I looked up creative writing courses, and I found one in a local community college, and I started that, and that is when it started, and that did give me the confidence to keep going.
Fantastic. So that was in California, I think, was it?
It was, that's right. Yes, it was in Marin County, just out of San Francisco.
Fantastic. So your first book, how long did it take you from doing that course to producing The Sweet Second Life of Daryl Kincaid, which was the first one we saw published, I think?
That's exactly right. Probably too long. I never want to put people off, but I did, between that time and getting Sweet Second Life published, I probably would have written 8 full-length novel manuscripts and had them all rejected. Some of them were rewrites of previous ones that I'd done. But it took me, I probably didn't really start writing seriously until, because we moved around a bit and moved to England, then we came back to New Zealand, and I didn't really have the time to keep, writing. Had to re-establish in business, all that sort of useful stuff like earning money. And I started writing probably in about early 2005. So it was 5 years of solid effort before I got Sweet Second Life sold to a publisher.
That is amazing. I mean, it is, there's so many people that I talk to. There is an apprenticeship time where you're finding your voice and developing confidence, and you obviously went through that in quite a real way.
Well, I really like the Stephen King book on writing, and he talks about, he thinks that bad writers are unteachable because they don't know that they're bad, so they can't be taught. But you can teach competent writers to be good. He also thinks that genius writers are, born, not made as well. So we all, most of us are in that good, competent to good range. And I think I started out all my life, my job was writing, so public relations, advertising, magazine writing. So I knew how to write a sentence. That doesn't mean that you know how to write a novel. And that's what I had to learn how to do. I had to learn about structure. I had to learn about character arc. I had to learn about voice. I had to learn about dialogue. And so very much an apprentice process that I went through, teaching myself through feedback, through rejection. And, and the best kind of rejection is one where they give you decent comments about what they found didn't work. So those were absolute gold. And I just decided that I would continue to keep going and, learn what I could from that feedback and put it into practice. And so I think I turned myself from a fairly, a basically competent writer, but not a particularly competent novelist, into a competent novelist, and that's when I got published.
Fantastic. Now, The Sweet Second Life was the first of a series of 3 books that all focused on women's stories with strong female characters, and they got categorised as, quote, chick lit, which became a little bit of a problem a bit further on for you. But chick lit, as Wikipedia defines it, is heroine-centred narratives that focus on the trials and tribulations of the protagonist. I guess for you that was a natural territory, being at the life stage you were at. But did you consider other genres?
Well, the thing is that I'd always wanted to write a funny book. And so, all my sort of inspirations when I was growing up were funny writers, Sue Townsend and Stella Gibbons and Nancy Mitford and Bill Bryson and Clive James. Woodhouse, of course, I loved them. And so I wanted to write a funny book. And this is how, sort of ignorant I was. I kind of didn't really realise that if you wrote a funny book about relationships, you were instantly in that chick lit category. I kind of knew that I was doing it because I knew that, Marian Keyes wrote that sort of thing, etc. Bridget Jones, obviously. I shouldn't call it Bridget Jones. It's actually Helen Fielding wrote Bridget Jones. We always refer to it. I'm sure she gets called Bridget Jones, And so I kind of knew that, but I didn't really understand the expectations of that genre, and I didn't understand that being marketed in that genre means that you are very much boxed up in this kind of pink fluffy category, with everybody else who's writing similar kinds of books. And so you don't get taken so seriously. And you are also expected to write a certain tone of book for the reader. So when I started writing, say, the third one, which was The Misplaced Affections of Charlotte Forbes, I wrote slightly darker, I had sort of darker bits in it. And people didn't like that because they want an unrelentingly cheerful, happy, funny book. And so that's when I decided that I had to break out of that genre because I wasn't ever going to write anything that was completely unrelentingly cheerful.
Yeah, and you also ran into a bit of flack, I think, because your women were maybe a bit too strong and their language was a little too salty, and that also didn't quite fit the chick lit trope. Was that?
No. Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, this was me just stumbling into areas that issues that I didn't know existed. I thought women who were strong and kind of outspoken and in charge of their lives and, just sort of like making it happen for themselves were really great. I thought that was a fantastic role model, but I got a lot of flack because they weren't vulnerable. And I think that chick lit heroine is expected to be vulnerable, to have something wrong with them. And I kind of really railed against that. I just didn't want, I can have heroines that have, things wrong with them or faults or flaws, and as I would have done in The Hiding Places, which is the next book I wrote, but very much I didn't want that for these particular characters. And to feel like I was forced to make them not so strong and to put something wrong with them was just complete anathema to me. I really didn't like it.
Yeah. When you think of particularly the Bridget Jones movies, she is a little bit of a pathetic case in a way, isn't she?
Yes, she is. Appealingly so, and they're great funny books. And if you pick all the Marian Keyes characters, I love Marian Keyes, and her writing is hilarious. She's a brilliant humorist, but all her female characters have something wrong with them. And I was really kind of angry with her because she has the Walsh sisters, and there's the Walsh family there's a lot of books about them. And she, the younger sister, Helen, had always been one of these strong, forthright characters throughout the whole book, series of books. And then when she finally wrote a book about Helen, she gave a depression. And I was really angry with her for doing that. I thought, Helen's been just full on for all these books. And then all of a sudden, no, you had to give her something wrong with her. No, don't do that.
Yeah, and that Jennifer Weiner in the States has said that, it started out being fun, breezy, relatable, and very authentic, and it sort of turned somewhere along the line, as far as the critics were concerned anyway, into disposable beach blanket fluff with no depth of insight or meaning. So it's really misogynistic, I think. I think it's just incredibly patronising, and I think it is a way of minimising women's work.
And the thing is, and it was a really great article, I think it was in The Guardian, about how it was called the male glance, so sort of playing on that male gaze thing, but it was saying this is the male glance when they look at it and just dismiss it with a glance. And the thing is, that glance is not just men who are doing it. It is, I think there's a lot of women who do dismiss things like romance writing and chick lit as things that are not worthy of their attention, because they have had this, sort of marginalisation of their worth happen through reviews, through a lot of, this male dismissal. But we've sort of, when people say chick lit to most readers, they go, oh, that pink fluffy stuff. So they don't even really know what it's about. They don't know what's in the genre, but they are already dismissing it. And I think that is something that we've been trained to do, and we should untrain ourselves, because there's a lot of fantastic writing and worthy writing. I mean, you get somebody like, you get Karl Ove Knausgaard, who writes endlessly about the minutiae of his daily life, and in some cases quite tediously, and he's touted as a genius. You get women writing about domestic detail, and they are dismissed, like Joanna Trollope as an Arga saga, because it's middle class in Britain. Or, some of these other ones, Jennifer Weiner, is dismissed as being, it's mummy suburban mummy stuff and things like that. And it's just like, so irritating.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if part of the problem is that we're quite used to having strong women in New Zealand. We probably lead the world in it, considering when you look at our past political history and even current political history with a PM who's just had a baby. Do you think that maybe we take some things for granted that aren't quite as accepted in other places as well?
I think that New Zealand writers, because New Zealand is small, I mean, New Zealanders in general, we are used to looking outward. And so we're very aware of the world, whereas people often in big countries they really have to be aware of that country. So they don't look outward as much. So we absorb a lot more kind of, we're a lot broader in our outlook, and I think that does translate to our fiction. So we do think sort of outside the box, I suppose, and we do assume that we've got a freedom to write what we want, and we do. And so I think that, and sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't fit what readers are expecting from a particular genre. So, I think New Zealanders, I think we're probably a bit more open-minded in our writing and a bit more flexible and less likely to write like everybody else does, so which is great, but sometimes readers want what everybody else is writing.
Having sort of talked a little bit about how the chick-lit thing is supposed to be all fun, your book number 2 had the great title of The Not-So-Perfect Life of Mo Lawrence, and it riffs very humorously on the lines of where book 1 ended, which was that she had the perfect life, and she very smugly says, I know, isn't it wonderful? And then we discover in book 2 that it wasn't so wonderful. I wonder if women find it reassuring to have a book that tells them that if you're trying to have it all, it is going to be jolly hard, and you're not alone in that, or something along those lines, that there is some reassurance in acknowledging the difficulties.
I think that's what all chick lit, if you want to call it that genre, does. I think that is about, like, looking at the complexities of women's lives and the juggling acts that we have to do and the difficulty in actually being the drivers of our own, lives and careers, and because we're often torn between a bunch of different actual duties and kind of expected, like societally imposed duties. And so, and that is a real struggle, and we're not really that free. We're certainly not as free as men to shape the way our lives go. And that's why I think this genre is so important, because it does give us this perspective into how women's lives can be tricky and how people can navigate it, and you can have fun reading about it at the same time.
Do you get feedback from readers that really basically underlines that view that you've just presented?
Do I? I can't think of anything that comes to mind, but I do have people sort of appreciate the fact that, for instance, Michelle's youngest, the baby, is totally fierce and completely, she's kind of a little small demon spawn, but completely in control of everybody. And she's great. And people actually come, they go, oh, I love Rosie so much, And so, it's funny, the female baby is able to be fully in control and manipulative, but, the adult female characters are not, which I find very interesting. So, I've had quite a lot of feedback about that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's great. Your latest book, Gabriel's Bay, you moved away a little bit from the triplet aspect, and it's also your first book that was set in New Zealand. You said that in reaction to some of that view that we've just been talking about, you wanted to try something with a broader appeal that still played to your strengths of characterization, dialogue, and humour. So tell us a little bit about Gabriel's Bay.
Well, I think Gabriel's Bay came because I still wanted to write funny books, but I needed to find a way not to be kind of trapped or boxed into that chick lit genre. So I actually did some sort of research trying to think of formats that would allow me to do that. And I ended up sort of lifting ideas from Maeve Binchy and Deborah Moggach, who wrote The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. They've both written books where there's a kind of a setting. So, i.e., the Marigold Hotel. And there are a bunch of different characters, and they all have their same stories. They all have their own stories. And then those stories interlink to make kind of one novel. And I thought, this is what I could use. So that's what I based the Gabriel's Bay structure on. And I also wanted to be able to, because one of the things I got flack for was kind of dwelling too much on the male characters in my chick lit books. I wanted to give them life and agency and complexity. And I think a lot of the time people just want heroes, and I didn't want to do just heroes. I wanted to do fully rounded men who were struggling with what it meant to be a man. And so I wanted to create a bunch of characters where I could explore all different aspects of being female, being young, being old, being a male, all that sort of stuff. And so that's how I was thinking and approaching it, but I also wanted it to be funny.
Yeah. And I think, harking back to book one, you had an credit acknowledgement there, quoting a friend who'd recommended a book that you said you absolutely adored and read several times, Destiny Bay by Don Byrne, which was a sort of family saga, I gather, set in Ireland. I must admit I've never heard of it before, but an Irish nobleman who marries a gypsy in 1889. And Don Byrne is known as a real storyteller. And I kind of got the feeling when I saw that and compared it with Gabriel's Bay, I thought, I bet there's a little seed that's been there for a long time that Catherine's kind of been going back to and nurturing in terms of the kinds of things she really enjoys. Would I be right on that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Destiny Bay is a wonderful book. I mean, he was extraordinarily popular in his day, which was sort of like the 20s and 30s. And he died sort of relatively young, I think, in the 40s in a motorcycle accident. And so Destiny Bay is a collection of stories that sort of moves through the years about this landowning Protestant Northern Irish landowning family. And but it is delightful and absolutely wonderful. Just absolutely love it. So Gabriel's Bay, I think, I've always wanted to pay homage, like sort of in the Sweet Second Life, the trilogy, I have gypsy characters who I've taken some of the names from Destiny Bay and used them and kind of riffed on some of those things that he talked about. And I called Gabriel's Bay. This is a long-winded sort of like way to sort of come to a title. But I kind of wanted to call it Destiny Bay, but it's just too twee, and it's existed, and it's too obvious, Yeah. So from Don Byrne, I got the actor Gabriel Byrne and called it Gabriel's Bay. So there you go.
Oh, fantastic. That's a great story. Wonderful. Look, turning a bit away from specific books to the wider career, is there one thing, and I think I can anticipate your answer already, but is there one thing you've done in your writing career more than any other that's been the secret to your success?
I would say keeping going.
Yeah.
And I mean, the thing is, you don't, in retrospect, if I knew that I was going to have to write 8 full-length manuscripts while juggling work and children and everything else in my life before I got published, I probably wouldn't have done it. But I didn't know. So every novel, every time I submitted something else, you think that could be the one, and then you get the rejection. And frankly, if you get a rejection, you've only got two choices. You can stop and quit and give up, or you can keep going. So I just kept going and tried to take what I could from the feedback and continue to learn, teach myself. And so persistence, I think, is one thing, and also I'm very organised with my time, and so I commit. Although I am a great procrastinator, I'm really, really talented at procrastinating, but I do put a lot of time aside, and I use that time wisely for writing. And I also write when I don't feel like it, which is pretty much all the time, because writing is really hard work. And I don't wait for the muse, and I don't wait to feel like it. I just knuckle down and do it. And so I think that's probably it, is just keeping on going.
So there's no likelihood that one of those 8 manuscripts might be worth self-publishing? I mean, just because the trad industry didn't quite see a market for it, it still might be a jolly good read.
Well, the thing is, they have all turned up. All those failures have been repurposed into the books that were successful. I have not wasted any ideas. If there were ideas that I liked in those books, trust me, I have picked the eyes out of those and I've put them in other books. So, I keep phrases, I keep notes, I keep characters, and they will turn up. I will make them live again. So,
It wasn't wasted.
It wasn't wasted, no.
No, that's great. Look, you're a master at bridging this gulf between the more literary end of the publishing spectrum and what's considered to be very much the genre end. You're vice president now at the moment of Romance Writers New Zealand, and I might say you're a very funny MC at the annual conferences. And you're also chair of the Wellington branch of the New Zealand Society of Authors, which is the serious guys in New Zealand. How do you balance those two, and do you find that they sometimes make uneasy bedfellows?
I have just actually stepped down as the chair of the Society of Authors. I did do that for 4 years. I'm also on the Book Awards Trust, which, I probably haven't updated my website, very likely. But I'm also on the Book Awards Trust, and who administer the New Zealand Book Awards, and I am also now on the board of Litfor, which is a literary festival that runs in November in Wellington.
Oh, right.
Yeah, exactly. And we've quite got a lot of experimental things and new works, and it's really great fun.
Yes.
And so I think, and I do a lot of chairing at literary festivals. I think the groups, the different sort of genres, do have this perception that there's sort of like this literary clique, and, that it's very difficult to penetrate that world. And I haven't found it difficult at all, because all I do is become interested in things and talk to people. And, all writers have got the same struggles. Yeah. All writers have their own, their doubts about their own worth. They have doubts about whether they can make a living, about whether they can get recognition, about whether they're going to get the next work published, whether the publishing industry is dying and it's never going to be revived, that the arts money is not going to be available. We all have those same worries, and fundamentally, it's the self-doubts that are the things that sort of connect us all. And I think no matter what you are writing, there's enough to connect you, there's more, and you have more in common than you don't. Yes. And so talking to writers in all genres and all, forms of writing, non-fiction, poetry, spec fic, romance, everything, is a really great way to get a perspective on what you're doing. Yeah. And to also learn about how other people approach things, and because the writing is a very solitary pursuit. And so getting in touch, getting some context on how you feel about it and what's going on for you with other people is fantastic. It's absolute gold, and we're all in the same boat. And the more we can kind of, I think, bond together, I think the sort of creative energy, expands. And I think if we want creative work to be a force in New Zealand, we have to connect it, has to be a gestalt, and we have to be greater than the sum of our parts. And we have to put that energy out there into the world and be a force to be reckoned with.
Sounds really inspirational, my dear. Look, turning to Catherine as reader, this is called The Joys of Binge Reading, and it's partly framed around the idea that people are a bit more inclined these days to binge read because of the ability to buy digitally online. Have you got authors that you binge read? And if so, who would you like to share with people?
Oh, wow. I mean, yes, I do have authors that I binge read. One of them is the late, great Terry Pratchett. I go through all his works and I reread them. Another one would be Sue Townsend, who wrote The Diary of Adrienne Mole, and I reread her books fairly regularly. I reread Jane Austen again, regularly. I find it so wonderful. Who else do I go back to? I go back to Nancy Mitford and Love in a Cold Climate. But I also go back to the non-fiction humorists. I go and reread Bill Bryson and Clive James, and there's some brilliant British women. There's a woman called Emma Kennedy who wrote these absolutely brilliant books about travelling. One's called The Tent, the Bucket and Me, and the other one's I Left My Tent in San Francisco. And I think I cried so hard laughing reading those books. I actually physically hurt myself and I had to stop for a while. So they were utterly brilliant. I mean, David Sedaris as well, another brilliant non-fiction humorist. Yeah. Obviously quite a few.
Yeah, I haven't heard of Emily Kennedy. I must look her up.
Oh, Emma Kennedy.
Emma.
Yeah. She's well worth it. Yeah.
Look, circling around, looking back and then looking forward, at this stage in your career, if you were doing it all again, what would you change, if anything?
I think I would join a writing group or I'd do another course. Because the course I did was, because there were a lot of people in the course, and so you only got a little bit of time that's focused on you and your work. And though you're learning by observing the feedback from, was given to other people, that's great. The reason I did the MA, I did that 3 years ago at the Institute of Modern Letters at Victoria University, was because it would be an intensive workshop situation and I'd be working with other writers. And I'd never had that before. And I did find that extraordinarily useful. And now I have a writing group. We just held it last night and we, two of us at a time take turns to submit some writing. And it's just incredibly valuable. I've critiqued Gabriel's Bay through my writing group and the sequel, which is coming out next year, which is called What You Wish For. And they are better books because I put them through my writing group. So having people whose opinion you value and is of worth to you, so not just, hey, yeah, I really like it, or your mum thinks it's great, that sort of thing. It's actually people who can critique it from a writing point of view. I would do that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I understand that you mentioned you've written a sequel to Gabriel Bay. That's coming out next year?
Yes, I don't know exactly when. It'd probably be, Gabriel's Bay came out in January this year, so I'm sort of expecting it'll be January, February next year, but I'm not entirely sure yet.
Yes. And what's next for Catherine as writer? What new projects do you have under development?
Well, I've done absolutely nothing this year, except in terms of writing, which is a bit sad. I did some research for a sort of a memoir bio based on my family's time in a fairly cult-like organisation. Not me, I didn't grow up in it. My parents had resigned before I was born, but there's some interesting things, and I'm interviewed some people, and I'm getting those interviews transcribed, and I'm going to pull it all together and shape that up into something. I'm not quite sure yet what. And then I envisaged, the Gabriel's Bay I always envisaged as a set of 3 books at the least. And so I've got a number 3, sort of milling around in my head. So I will probably start that as well. That will be my main things.
That's a big project. So the memoir, would that be non-fiction or fiction?
Yes, it'll be non-fiction. So it'll be a kind of concentrating on my mother in particular and the effect of she was brought up in this organisation and then on my childhood, how it all affected my childhood. So it will be interesting to see whether I can pull it together. There's been some wonderful books like Diana Wichtel's Driving to Treblinka or, Adam Dudding's My Father's Island and Friends of New Zealand ones. Wonderful. And So it's quite a high bar to enter into that field. So we'll see how we go.
Sounds fascinating as well. We're coming to an end, actually, of our time together. So where can readers find you online?
Well, I've got Facebook page. So I can even remember the Facebook, if you just look at Catherine Robertson, New Zealand author, you'll find me on Facebook.
Yes.
And I'm on Twitter at CJR author on Twitter.
Yes.
And my website's there, but that's really just information that I clearly need to update, so I should probably go and do that now. But Facebook, I'm best on Facebook, and Twitter is the second sort of, tier to that.
Do you spend much time on social media?
I spend a reasonable amount of time. I sort of I observe more than I put on, but I'm very interested in it, and I like it as a medium because I like to put little bits of news and stuff into it. And it's a good way to sort of tell people what I'm doing, because I do things on the radio quite often, and so it's quite a nice way to let people know what I'm up to, and also to celebrate. I think it's a really great way to celebrate other authors, because I think that's what we have to do. We have to be each other's cheerleaders, and so if there's news that my friends are launching or they've had a success or something like that, then I want to put that up there as well.
Sure, and you probably do quite a few public meetings as well, either as a sort of running them, but do you do much in terms of promoting your own work by readings or meeting people, that kind of thing?
Well, I do. I really like chairing sessions at writers' festivals, with other writers.
Yes.
It's a real skill, and I'm just learning it. But every session you do, you get better at it, and I really enjoy that. I find that whole process it's kind of terrifying, but it's really good fun, and it's a really good way of getting into other people's works as well. And then it gets you in front of people as well as with the audiences. And then I like going on stage and talking about my own books. I did that in the Wairarapa has a Yarns and Barns festival every 2 years, and got to have a chat about Gabriel's Day and that was great fun. And so, obviously when the book comes out, I'll do launches and things like that, and I love to say yes to people invite me to festivals. I've got doing something at the National Writers Forum for New Zealand Society of Authors, and then I've got the Hawke's Bay Arts Festival coming up in October, which will be great fun.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much. You've also got Romance Writers in August, haven't you?
I've got Romance Writers. Oh, and I've got in August I've got Hamilton Book Month and the Word Festival in Christchurch, which I can't forget.
Wow, you are getting around the country.
Yeah, it's quite full on the next few months, actually.
Look, thank you so much for your time today. It's been fantastic talking to you, and it's really for someone who's only just starting out, it's amazing to think of the amount of work that went in before you even got a book published. So that's inspirational. It really is.
That's good. Yes, keep going, people. Keep going. You can do it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Catherine.
Thanks, Jenny. Lovely to talk to you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Joys of Binge Reading podcast. You can find all the details and links for this episode at www.thejoysofbingereading.com. We'd love to hear your comments and suggestions for who you'd like us to interview next. And if you enjoyed the show, take a moment to subscribe on iTunes or a similar provider so you won't miss out on future guests. Thanks for joining us, and happy reading. The Joys of Binge Reading podcast is put together with fantastic technical help from Dan Cotton and Abe Raffles. Dan is an experienced sound and video engineer who's ready and available to help you with your next project. Seek him out at dcaudioservices@gmail.com. That's D for Daniel, C for Charlie, audioservices@gmail.com, or check our show notes. He's fast, he takes pride in getting it right, and he's great to work with. Our voiceovers are done by Abe Raffles, another gem of sound and screen. Abe has 20 years of experience on both sides of the camera/microphone, as a cameraman director and also as a voice artist and TV presenter. I think you'd agree that his voice is both light-hearted and warm. He is super easy to work with no matter what the job.
You'll find him at Abe, A-B-E, at pointandshoot.co.nz. As I say, the full details in the show notes on the website. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. Hopefully see you next week. Bye.